Tonight, we step onto Wall Street at the very moment the world unraveled. The fall of 1929, when fortunes vanished faster than ink on a ticker tape. The stock market crash was more than numbers plummeting on a board. It was the sound of panic echoing through marble halls, the shuffle of clerks racing with slips of paper, and the quiet despair of bankers staring into the abyss of a vanished economy. In those days, working on Wall Street meant living at the heart of chaos. Some clung to optimism, others drowned in despair, and many simply tried to survive the daily grind as the Great Depression tightened its grip. So settle in as we imagine what it was really like to work behind the brass doors of finance during one of history's darkest economic storms. A story of ambition, collapse, and the strange resilience of those who stayed at their desks while the world fell apart. Before we begin, if you truly enjoy these stories, hitting like and subscribe helps me keep making them, and hopefully helps you keep drifting off. Let me know when and where you're listening from tonight. I'm always amazed by the places people tune in. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath in, and then let it out, because once this story begins, chances are you'll be asleep before it ends. 1929, the year the music stopped, the year fortunes turned to smoke, the year Wall Street learned gravity the hard way. But living it? It didn't feel like a single year, let alone a single day. It felt like standing on a stage where the lights were blinding, the applause deafening, and nobody could see that the floorboards were already cracking beneath their feet. It felt like being caught in a dream so dazzling that waking up was the last thing anyone wanted. The Roaring Twenties hadn't just roared. They had howled, spun, and dazzled. Cities rose skyward, jazz bands shook the night, and radios filled kitchens with voices that seemed to promise a new century every morning. Everywhere you turned, the world whispered bigger, faster, richer. The future wasn't coming, it was already here, and it was wearing a tuxedo. On Wall Street, the ticker never slept. It clattered and spit out paper ribbons like prophecies, each number a promise of easy fortune. Men in suits quoted stock tips like preachers quoting scripture, and women, newly bold with bobbed hair and flapper skirts, marched into brokerages with the same confidence they took onto the dance floor. Why not? The market never went down. At least not in the stories people chose to tell. If you wanted proof of prosperity, you didn't need numbers. You just had to walk the streets. Cars lined up in glittering rows. New towers of steel and glass climbed into the clouds. Even a shoeshine boy might boast that he owned shares in US Steel. Nobody laughed. Nobody doubted. The only crime was being cautious. And in the middle of it all was you, just another clerk, ink-stained and overtired, tucked behind a desk in the financial district. You weren't a titan of industry, or a robber baron, or a name destined for the headlines. You were just a pair of hands feeding the machine, writing down the dreams of strangers who thought tomorrow would always be brighter than today. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. Enough to feel the hum in the air, the buzz that seeped into your bones every morning. At night, the glow spread even farther. Broadway neon burned through the dark like a second sunrise. Speakeasies hid behind locked doors, pouring gin into glasses as fast as jazz musicians could play. The laughter was too loud, the dancing too wild, the confidence too unshakable. Everyone knew prohibition was a joke, just like everyone knew the market only went one way, up. Laws and limits were for someone else. From the outside, it looked unstoppable. America had beaten war, conquered fear, and turned prosperity into a pastime. Every morning brought another record broken, another headline promising riches. Optimism wasn't a mood. It was the air itself, thick enough to choke you. And yet, if you listened closely, you might hear something else beneath the brass bands and ticker clatter. A whisper, splinter, a quiet question nobody wanted to voice. What if it doesn't last? Of course, nobody asked out loud. Why would they? When you're in the middle of the brightest party in history, you don't check the exits. You order another drink, you bet on another stock, you laugh a little louder to drown out the unease. Tomorrow can wait. Tomorrow has always delivered. But tomorrow was waiting too, and when it arrived it wouldn't be polite. The morning begins with a subway car so packed it feels less like transportation and more like a science experiment in human density. You cling to the overhead strap, your briefcase wedged against your ribs, the air thick with damp wool and a smell that can only be described as last night's cigars reheated. A man beside you mutters numbers from the financial page like a prayer, as if whispering them will make his stocks rise by sheer willpower. The newspaper headline is predictable. Market reaches new record. Of course it does. At this rate, the Dow will need a telescope. Gravity is for apples and airplanes, not for Wall Street. When the train screeches into Wall Street Station, you're carried up the stairs in a tide of ambition. Shoes click against stone steps. Newsboys shout headlines, their voices cracking from overuse. Vendors shout about chestnuts and pretzels, but really they're selling background noise to an already chaotic morning. The canyon of skyscrapers swallows you whole, steel and stone rising high enough to blot out the sun. At the far end of Broad Street, the New York Stock Exchange towers like a temple. Columns, flags, marble, the whole production. People gather at its steps as though they expect divine revelation with the morning bell. And maybe they'll get it, if you consider the market going up again, a kind of miracle. Your office is smaller, tucked a block away, but it hums with the same madness. The door creaks open and you step into bedlam. The ticker tape machine is already clattering, vomiting out numbers faster than anyone can read. Telephones ring with the urgency of alarms. Messengers sprint, clerks shout, and brokers bellow so loudly the walls themselves might file complaints. You slide into your chair and start writing. Ink smears your fingers as you race across ledgers, recording the dreams of strangers. A schoolteacher puts her savings into radio. A grocer doubles down on steel. A barber swears aviation will make him rich. Nobody wants to be left behind. It's as though the entire country decided the future is for sale, and all you have to do is scribble fast enough to catch it. Your boss struts by, cigar clenched in his teeth, the picture of confidence. At least until you notice his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the desk. He tells a client the market is as strong as the Brooklyn Bridge. You don't mention that the Brooklyn Bridge has been patched so many times it's practically held together by optimism alone. By late morning, the office is a madhouse. One broker yells, "Put everything into RCA." Another shouts back, "Radio's yesterday, aviation is the future." The two glare like rival prophets, both convinced heaven is taking messages exclusively through them. You keep writing, wrist aching, silently betting at least one of them will be wrong. At lunch, the corner diner is so full you wonder if the entire exchange relocated there. The windows are fogged with steam, the smell of burnt coffee thick in the air. Nobody talks about food, every table buzzes with speculation. A man boasts about his Ford shares, cars are forever. Another insists radio will replace newspapers completely. A woman in a green hat whispers she mortgaged her house for RCA. Her friend gasps, then nods like this is perfectly reasonable behaviour. Even the waiter leans in to declare, the market never goes down. Right, and New York never smells like garbage. Back at the office, the mania doubles. The ticker spews tape onto the floor in white drifts. Clerks scramble to keep up. Clients file in with eyes shining as if they can already see their fortunes shimmering on the horizon. Everywhere you look, belief feels airtight. Nobody's worried, nobody even hesitates. When the closing bell rings, the frenzy simply spills into the street. Newsboys wave fresh papers with headlines shouting record highs again. A man crows that his fortune doubled in a week. Another declares he'll retire before Christmas. The sidewalks hum with laughter, arguments, and the smell of cigars. It feels less like finance and more like a festival of denial. The walk uptown takes you past Broadway, where neon lights flicker to life. Theatres spill out audiences chattering about musicals and matinees. Behind hidden doors, speakeasies throb with jazz. You slip inside one, paying discreetly at the entrance. Inside, smoke curls through the air. A trumpet screams bright and brassy. The bass thrums steady as a heartbeat. Couples fling themselves into the Charleston sequin sparkling, shoes striking sparks against the floor. Prohibition is the law of the land, but gin flows here like a river. The only thing illegal in this room is caution. Later you walk home through quieter streets. Street lamps cast golden halos across cobblestones slick with mist. A lone newsboy sells the last of his papers, the headline glowing under the light. Market surges. Fortune for all. You shake your head, wondering how many times that word, fortune, can be printed before it runs out of ink. In your apartment, the sounds of the day still rattle in your head. The clatter of the ticker, the shouts of the brokers, the hum of jazz. You lie down, heart still thumping with the pulse of Wall Street. Sleep presses at your eyes, but a thought lingers. How long can this really last? The glow of prosperity feels unshakable tonight, but faintly, just faintly, a shadow has crept into the room. Not loud, not obvious, just enough to make you wonder what might happen if the music ever stopped. March of 1929 arrives with confetti and brass bands. The nation swears in Herbert Hoover, and he wastes no time promising a future so bright you might need sunglasses just to read the paper. On Inauguration Day, he declares, "We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land." It's a bold statement. Bolder still when you realize half the audience is nodding like this was an obvious truth all along. But the next morning that line is everywhere. It's printed in the Times, whispered in coffee shops, shouted across Wall Street like a password. Your boss repeats it twice before lunch as though quoting scripture. Brokers puff cigars with newfound swagger, suddenly convinced they've been drafted into the army of destiny. One clerk jokes that Hoover should skip politics and just run the exchange directly. Why bother with democracy when prosperity is guaranteed? But not everyone's drinking the champagne of eternal growth. Roger Babson, an economist with more sense than friends, clears his throat at a luncheon and warns, "Sooner or later, a crash is coming." The papers dutifully print his remarks, and Wall Street reacts with the maturity of a schoolyard. They laugh. They call him Dr. Doom. The market rises the next day just to spite him, as if the Dow itself enjoyed practical jokes. Still, the words nag at you. They hover in the back of your mind each time the ticker tape hesitates, each time the office falls silent for half a second before the next order. Babson vanishes from headlines, but his warning lingers like the faint smell of smoke in a supposedly fireproof room. By summer, even the Federal Reserve starts to look nervous. Rates are nudged upward in the hope of cooling the frenzy. Bankers mutter about speculation. Politicians wring their hands, and yet the crowd only grows louder. The interest hike is treated like a mosquito at a parade. Annoying, yes, but nothing that can stop the marching band. Clients still pour into your office with glowing eyes. A grocer from Brooklyn insists on doubling his stake in steel. A secretary buys radio shares with her year's savings. A widow clutching a worn envelope wants to put everything into aviation. When your boss suggests caution, she waves him off. Why be cautious in a new era, she asks, as if the future came with a warranty. At lunch in the crowded diner, the chatter has grown manic. Men argue loudly over which automaker will rule the century. A man in suspenders pounds the table and declares, "Henry Ford himself couldn't build cars fast enough to keep up with my profits." His companion scoffs and insists radios will replace newspapers entirely. In the corner, a young woman scribbles notes furiously. She's buying RCA because every home will need a radio just like they need bread. Even the cook joins in, waving his spatula like a gavel. Buy anything, just don't sell. You finish your sandwich quickly, not because you are in a hurry, but because listening too long makes your stomach ache. It's hard to eat with so many people shouting about fortunes that already seem spent in their minds. Walking back, you pass a construction site. The Chrysler building is climbing higher, its silver crown beginning to glint against the summer sky. Men dangle from beams, swinging hammers as if they have wings instead of legs. The city itself looks unstoppable, each new floor rising as proof that gravity has been banished. For a moment you believe it. Then the thought returns. What if Babson was right? Back in the office, the strain begins to show. Your boss arrives earlier, leaves later, his collar damp with sweat. He chews his pen while scanning the tape, sometimes pounding his fist when the numbers slip. Clerks scribble faster, ledgers piling higher. The atmosphere is like trying to bail water from a boat while someone keeps drilling more holes in the hull. At home, you hear the same story. Neighbours chatter about their stocks in the hallway. The doorman mutters that his cousin lost money last week, but we'll win it back tomorrow. The woman at the corner store boasts she's buying more RCA for her children because radio is forever. It feels like living in a city where the only topic of conversation is the weather, and the forecast is always sunshine. And the papers only reinforce it. Market surges to new record, another week of gains. The headlines are a broken record, cheerful to the point of parody. Reading them, you can almost hear the unspoken subtext. Don't think too hard, just keep climbing. Yet the cracks are there if you look closely. A broker at the diner rubs his temples after hearing of a neighbour ruined by a margin call. A clerk whispers that he's working longer hours but still falling behind. One night you overhear two partners in the office talking low. The loans are too deep, one mutters. If the market stumbles even a little, the whole thing could collapse. The other sighs, then answers, "Then let's just pray it doesn't stumble." Solid strategy. You lie in bed that night staring at the ceiling. The ticker's clatter still echoes in your ears. Numbers swim across the darkness, each one a little heavier than the last. Sleep comes slowly, and with it, a question that refuses to leave. What happens if the music stops? For now, though, the orchestra plays on. The headlines remain bright, the brokers still shout, the city still dances. But somewhere in the distance, faint as thunder on a clear day, the first cracks are waiting. Soon the laughter won't be enough to drown them out. Summer of 1929 arrives hot and restless. The city bakes under the sun, and so does Wall Street. But nobody blames the heat for the sweat dripping down collars. That belongs to the ticker. It starts with small dips, tiny shudders in the market that last a day or two. The papers call them healthy corrections, as though losing a chunk of your savings is the financial equivalent of eating vegetables. Everyone nods sagely and repeats the phrase as if they invented it themselves. A healthy correction. Sure, so is a broken arm if you believe enough. In your office, the mood tightens. Orders keep flowing in, but the laughter is thinner. Your boss no longer smokes his cigar all the way through. Half of it burns out in the ashtray while he chews the other half like a nervous dog. The clerk still scribble furiously, but their jokes come slower. Every now and then someone looks at the ticker tape with an expression that says, "Wait, was that supposed to happen?" One morning you overhear two partners in the back office. Their voices are sharp, almost panicked. "The loans are insane," one hisses. 90% debt, 10% cash, if this wobbles even slightly." The other cuts him off. "Then don't let it wobble. Great plan. Just tell gravity to mind its business." At lunch, the diner feels different too. The same fried potatoes, the same burnt coffee, the same overworked waiter. But the tone has shifted. Instead of boasting, people argue. A man in suspenders pounds the table. "Ford is bulletproof," he insists. His companion snorts. "Bulletproof?" The new Chevrolets are eating their lunch. They glare, chewing sandwiches as though they personally own Detroit. In the corner, two young women whisper nervously. One admits she borrowed money to buy stock on margin. The other gasps like she just confessed to murder, then nods approvingly. Apparently ruin is fashionable now. You stir your coffee and wonder if anyone here remembers how savings accounts work. Back at the office, the ticker tape slows one afternoon. The machine groans as though it's choking on the volume. Clerks lean in closer, straining to catch up. The numbers lag minutes behind reality, and the room fills with the smell of sweat and fear. When it finally sputters back to speed, everyone exhales at once. No one says it out loud, but you can feel it. The system itself is buckling. In the evenings, you notice the shift on the streets. People still talk about stocks, but now their voices carry a nervous edge. The shoeshine boy who once bragged about owning US Steel mutters that he sold too soon. A taxi driver admits he's waiting to see what happens before buying more. Waiting, a word you've never heard on Wall Street before. The papers, of course, refuse to admit anything is wrong. Headlines still trumpet prosperity, though the paragraphs beneath them now sound like anxious reassurance. One declares, market strong despite temporary setback. Another promises, economists agree, no danger ahead. Reading them feels like watching a magician sweat through a trick that isn't working. Your neighbours start to notice too. In the hallway, Mrs. Donnelly from down the hall whispers that her brother lost money last week. The doorman sighs that he's heard of margin calls hitting people he knows. The corner shopkeeper admits she's worried about her RCA shares but refuses to sell. "Why would I sell?" she laughs nervously. "If I sell, I'll lose money." Which is technically true and completely insane. By late summer, the tension is impossible to ignore. One Friday brings a sudden drop. People gasp, clutching their newspapers as though the ink itself had betrayed them. The next Monday, the market surges back up and everyone cheers. See, just a correction. But the laughter rings hollow. Even the most confident investors glance sideways now, as if waiting for the other shoe to fall. Inside the exchange, the chaos only grows. Traders shove, shout, wave papers like flags in battle. The floor looks less like finance and more like a food fight. Clerks scurry between desks, their shoes slipping on curls of ticker tape. From the gallery above, spectators watch as though this were theatre. And in a way it is, comedy for some, tragedy waiting for others. You try to sleep at night, but the numbers won't let you. They march across the darkness behind your eyes, rising, falling, stuttering, crashing. Every time you think you've drifted off, you hear the clatter of the ticker again. Even in dreams, you're still at your desk. Yet by morning, the optimism returns. The bell rings, the papers shout, the crowds cheer. Denial is stronger than coffee, it gets everyone through the day. People cling to hope as though sheer belief can keep the market aloft. But belief doesn't stop cracks from spreading. Soon, those cracks will widen. They will grow into chasms that swallow fortunes whole. And one October morning, the facade will finally crumble loud enough that no headline can cover it. October 24th begins like any other Thursday. The sun rises pale over Manhattan. The streets echo with the same shoes, the same shouts, the same smell of coffee and ambition. You walk toward Wall Street, half dreaming, half dreading just another day in the machine. But something in the air feels wrong. The crowds outside the exchange are larger, restless, their voices pitched just a little higher. Newsboys shout headlines with too much force, as if volume can keep the ink true. Market strong, they insist, which is the kind of thing you only shout when it isn't. Inside your office, the ticker tape machine rattles with unusual urgency. It spits numbers so fast the paper curls in and drifts across the floor. Clerks bend low, scrambling to keep up. Brokers shout orders with panic edging their throats. Your boss lights a cigar, then puts it out immediately. Something he's never done before. By mid-morning, the slide has begun. Stock after stock tumbles lower. The ticker falls minutes behind the frenzy, choking on its own workload. Investors crowd the phones, demanding to know what's happening. Nobody knows. Nobody wants to admit they don't know. On the exchange floor, chaos reigns. Traders shove one another, waving slips of paper like surrender flags. The noise is deafening, shouts, bells, the endless tearing of paper. It looks less like finance and more like a riot with better suits. Spectators watch from the gallery, their faces pale as if they've stumbled into the wrong play. Rumours run wild, banks are failing, fortunes are gone. The president himself is about to step in. No rumour is too absurd to repeat. In fact, the more absurd, the faster it spreads. You watch your boss slam down the phone. Margin calls everywhere, he growls. Clients are being forced to sell at losses they can't cover. The very debt that built the bubble is now snapping like a trap. It's as if the market suddenly remembered gravity after years of ignoring it. At noon, word spreads that JP Morgan's bankers have gathered in a private room plotting rescue. The bankers' pool, they call it, a handful of men with enough money to play hero. The rumour alone steadies the market for a few hours. Traders cling to it like sailors to driftwood. See? One broker insists. They'll fix it. They always do. Of course, he says this while sweating through his collar. Outside on Broad Street, the crowd swells. People press against the exchange steps, desperate for any scrap of news. Every cheer is followed by a groan, every rumour chased by doubt. One man shouts that steel is recovering. Another screams it's doomed. You stand at the window and wonder how long before the street itself boils over. The afternoon is worse. Prices tumble again, steeper this time. The ticker groans, hopelessly behind. Traders fight for scraps, their voices hoarse. Clerks like you scribble until your hands cramp up, but the orders pile faster than ink can dry. It feels like writing down the score of a game where every team is losing. By late afternoon, the rescue arrives. A group of bankers steps onto the exchange floor, their presence meant to inspire calm. They buy blue-chip stocks in heavy amounts: US Steel, AT&T, General Electric. For a moment the panic slows. People whisper that the worst is over. The headlines the next day will call it a stabilization, but you can already feel it. It's only a pause, not a cure. When the closing bell finally rings, the noise doesn't stop. It spills into the street like floodwater. Crowds surge, shouting, arguing, grasping for answers. A man in a bowler hat cheers that his fortune is safe. Another sobs that he's ruined. The contradiction is dizzying, and the only constant is confusion. That night you walk uptown through streets humming with rumours. Every diner buzzes with speculation. Every bar is thick with smoke and anxious laughter. In a speakeasy the band plays louder than usual, as if jazz itself can drown out the panic. You sip a drink that tastes sharper than normal, wondering if it's the gin or your nerves. The papers the next morning strike a triumphant note. Bankers restore order, one headline proclaims. Another declares market rebound underway. You read them over breakfast and almost believe it. Almost. But the memory of yesterday lingers in your bones. You know what denial looks like. It's printed in ink right in front of you. For now, the city breathes again. People smile nervously, brokers joke half-heartedly, and clerks like you cling to the illusion that the storm has passed. But deep down, everyone knows it hasn't. Black Thursday was only the first crack. The real collapse waits just around the corner. Friday morning arrives with forced optimism. The newspapers trumpet headlines about stability, order, and the heroics of JP Morgan's bankers. Market restored, one insists. Another gushes. Stocks rally after confidence returns. It sounds less like journalism and more like wishful thinking scrawled in bold type. In your office, the mood is better. On the surface, brokers slap each other on the back with grins too wide to be real. Clerks joke weakly about working overtime, their laughter brittle. Your boss lights a cigar and actually finishes half of it before letting it die in the ashtray. It's progress, technically. The ticker tape rattles along, still fast but not frantic. Stocks edge upward for a while and everyone exhales at once. The word of the day is recovery. It's repeated so often you'd think it was printed on every desk blotter. A broker announces to the room, "We've seen the bottom. Up we go from here." He sounds confident. He also sounds exactly like a man who doesn't believe his own words. At lunch, the diner hums with nervous chatter. People are eating faster, talking faster, laughing louder. Two men argue over whether steel is back on track. A woman in pearls insists she's keeping all her shares. It's just a bump. The cook delivers coffee with the same line he gave you last week. The market never goes down. This time, even he doesn't sound convinced. Saturday brings a half day of trading, and it's more of the same. The market seesaws, struggling to find direction. Traders cheer at minor upticks, groan at small dips. It feels like watching a drunk man try to walk a straight line. Nobody says it out loud, but the unease is spreading. Outside the exchange, the crowds remain. Some come for news, others just to gawk at the spectacle. Wall Street has become theatre, and panic sells tickets. One man cheers any time a stock ticks upward, waving his hat like he's at a ball game. Another mutters darkly about banks conspiring to hide the truth. Neither looks especially sane, but then again, neither does the market. Sunday offers no trading, but it doesn't offer rest either. The city buzzes with rumour. Church sermons mention greed more often than usual. Dinner tables become miniature stock exchanges, families arguing over whether to sell or hold. On the radio, commentators offer reassurances wrapped in vagueness, temporary adjustment, return to normal, bright future. It sounds a lot like trying to patch a sinking ship with compliments. You walk through Central Park that afternoon hoping for quiet. Children chase kites. Couples stroll arm in arm. The leaves glow with autumn colour. For a moment it feels like nothing could possibly be wrong. Then you overhear a man on a bench telling his friend he lost everything on margin last week. Your friend pats his shoulder and says, "Don't worry, you'll win it back." You keep walking, wondering if denial is now the city's most common language. That evening in a speakeasy, the band plays louder than usual. The trumpet screams, the bass thumps, dancers fling themselves across the floor. It's as though the music itself is trying to shout over the creeping sense of dread. People laugh too hard, drink too fast, cling too tightly to the illusion of joy. You sip your gin and wonder how many of them mortgaged their future just to be here tonight. Monday morning arrives with a brittle calm. The exchange opens, and for a few hours the market holds steady. Traders breathe easier. Headlines are cautiously optimistic. Tide turning, confidence returning. But beneath the surface the cracks deepen. The ticker is still sluggish. The order's still frantic. You watch your boss pace the floor, chewing the end of his pen like it owes him money. By midday, the seesaw begins again. Stocks drop, rebound, drop again. The office hums with forced laughter and nervous coughs. Every phone call begins with reassurance and ends with doubt. You can feel it in your bones. Something larger is looming. That night, you can't sleep. The sound of the ticker still rattles in your head. You dream of numbers tumbling, pages fluttering, voices shouting. When you wake, your hands ache as though you never stopped writing. Outside, the city lies quiet, unaware of what tomorrow will bring. Because tomorrow is Tuesday, and Tuesday will not be like any other day. Tuesday will turn the word crash into a headline so large it will echo for generations. October 29th, 1929. The morning sky over Manhattan looks ordinary enough, grey, cool, indifferent, but the city itself vibrates with unease. Broad Street is already swollen with people before the exchange even opens. Faces pale, hats pulled low, voices carrying the sharp edge of fear. Inside your office, the atmosphere feels brittle. The clerks shuffle papers without looking at each other. Brokers bark orders too quickly, their voices cracking. Your boss lights a cigar, takes one drag and snuffs it out immediately. A bad omen. He usually makes it at least halfway. The bell rings and the market implodes. It doesn't dip, doesn't slide, it plunges. Within minutes, the ticker is hopelessly behind. Orders flood in faster than anyone can process. Clerks like you scribble until your wrists burn, trying to record chaos in neat lines of ink. The exchange floor is pandemonium. Traders shout until their throats bleed, waving papers like drowning men grasping at air. The roar is deafening, 1,000 voices colliding into pure noise. From the gallery above, spectators watch in horror, some covering their mouths, others cheering like gamblers who don't realize the house always wins. By mid-morning, it becomes clear this isn't a correction. It isn't even a bad day. It's collapse. Shares of US Steel, RCA, General Motors, giants, plunge like stones in water. Every tick downward shatters another fortune. The numbers feel less like prices and more like falling bodies. Rumours sweep through the office faster than the ticker tape. Banks are failing. Millionaires are ruined. The exchange might close. One clerk swears he heard someone jumped from a window. Another swears it was 3. Nobody bothers to check if any of it is true. The panic doesn't need facts. It runs fine on fumes. You glance at the ticker machine struggling to keep up. Its clatter frantic. Its tape curling onto the floor in white drifts. It looks exhausted, as if even the machine wants to give up. For years that little box sang prosperity. Today it groans ruin. Clients flood the phones, their voices high-pitched with terror. Sell everything! No, wait, hold. Tell me it's turning around. The brokers give answers that aren't really answers. Nobody can admit the truth, that nobody knows what's happening and nobody can stop it. By noon, the figures are catastrophic. Over 16 million shares will trade hands by day's end. A volume so absurd it's like trying to count raindrops in a storm. Each trade is another life unravelling. A decade of paper fortunes is vanishing in hours. On Broad Street outside, the crowd has swelled into a sea of hats and fear. People push close to the exchange, desperate for news. Cheers erupt at every tiny uptick, only to dissolve into groans as the slide continues. The air is heavy with sweat, cigar smoke, and dread. A man shouts, "It's recovering!" A woman yells back, "You're blind!" Both are wrong. Back in the office, your boss slams down the phone and sinks into his chair. His face is grey, his hands trembling. "Nothing left," he mutters. "Margin calls everywhere. They can't pay. Nobody can pay." He doesn't look at you, doesn't look at anyone. Just stares at the desk as if the wood itself betrayed him. You keep writing, though your hand shakes, the ink blot smearing across the page. It doesn't matter. Accuracy feels pointless when the numbers themselves are meaningless, shifting so fast that even the paper can't keep up. By late afternoon, the floor of the exchange looks like a battlefield. Paper litters the ground knee-deep. Traders' voices are raw, their faces slick with sweat. Some slump against walls, their suits wrinkled, their eyes hollow. Others still scream orders, refusing to admit the game is over. The closing bell finally rings, but it doesn't bring relief. It only seals the ruin. 16 million shares traded, billions in value erased, countless lives upended. The sound echoes like a funeral bell. Nobody cheers, nobody claps. The silence afterward is worse than the roar. That night the city walks in a daze. Theatres go dark as crowds gather instead at diners and taverns, whispering about fortunes lost. A man weeps openly at the counter, his head in his hands. Another stares blankly at a glass of gin untouched. The band in the speakeasy plays slower tonight, their notes heavy, as if even jazz has lost faith. The papers the next morning don't shout anymore, they whisper. Wall Street in chaos, Black Tuesday. The words themselves feel heavy, final. Reading them at breakfast, you know the world has shifted. The bubble is not just burst, it's obliterated. The mania of the last decade is over, the carnival is gone. All that remains is the echo of the fall and the long silence that follows. But soon that silence will grow louder, as offices empty and fortunes vanish overnight. The days after Black Tuesday feel like waking up in a city you no longer recognise. Wall Street, once loud enough to shake the pavement, has fallen strangely quiet. Not silent exactly, there are still footsteps, still murmurs, still the clack of typewriters. But the energy is gone, replaced by something colder, something closer to morning. Your office, always bursting at the seams with clerks, now looks half empty. Desks that once overflowed with ledgers sit bare. The tickers still chatter, but they sound lonely. Their tape curling into piles nobody rushes to read. Where there was once shouting, there is only whispering. The difference is louder than any bell. Each morning brings the same ritual. Your boss scanning the books, his face growing darker. Another client ruined, another account closed, another name scratched out of the ledger like it never existed. It feels less like bookkeeping and more like writing obituaries. The firings begin quietly. First, a clerk is told not to bother coming back after lunch. Then another vanishes midweek. His desk cleared before anyone dares ask why. By Friday, whole rows of desks sit vacant. Nobody talks about it, but everyone notices. It's like watching a theatre empty before the play is over. You stay for now, partly because you're lucky, partly because you're too afraid to leave. Your boss mutters something about loyalty and experience, but you know the truth. You're cheap labour. In this new world, that's practically a superpower. On the exchange floor, the chaos has been replaced by gloom. The shouts are gone, replaced with mutters and sighs. Traders stand around in clusters, staring at the tape as if it might apologise. Spectators in the gallery no longer cheer. They gawk, whisper, shake their heads. It looks less like a marketplace and more like a wake. The tickers tell the story day after day. Decline, decline, decline. Each morning starts with hope. Each afternoon ends with despair. The numbers keep falling like a staircase with no bottom. You wonder if gravity itself has taken control of the market. If so, it's ruthless. At lunch, the diner feels emptier too. The men in suspenders who once shouted about Ford and Chevrolet now sit in silence, staring into their soup. The woman who bragged about RCA doesn't come anymore. The cook doesn't bother with optimism, just slides you coffee without a word. Silence tastes bitter. You walk the streets and notice the changes. Shops once busy with customers now sit empty. Signs for help wanted quietly vanish. A shoe-shine boy who once bragged about stocks now stares at his rags, muttering about losing his last client. The city is dimming, one light at a time. One night you pass a broker you recognise slumped against a lamppost. His suit is wrinkled, his tie loosened, his eyes vacant. He once strutted through the exchange like a king. Now he mutters numbers under his breath as if clinging to ghosts. You keep walking. What can you say to a man who just watched his world collapse? Your boss grows quieter by the day. He no longer shouts, no longer jokes, no longer pretends. He just sits at his desk staring at the same column of numbers for hours. Sometimes you catch him rubbing his temples, whispering to himself. Not prayers, calculations, always calculations, and always ending the same way, ruin. The office becomes a museum of broken ambition. Ledger books stacked like tombstones, empty chairs lined up like silent witnesses, the air thick with dust and failure. You keep working because it's all you can do, because if you stop, you might have to admit what's really happening. And yet, even now, some refuse to believe. A broker in the building insists this is just another dip. He talks loudly about the rebound, as if saying it enough times will make it real. People nod politely, but nobody believes him. Hope is running on fumes. By the end of November, the market has lost half its value. Half. It doesn't feel possible, and yet there it is, written on every page of ticker tape curling across the floor. Fortunes built over years have vanished in weeks. The speed of it is obscene. The depression hasn't fully revealed itself yet, but you can feel it coming. It waits outside the office doors, prowling the streets, sharpening its teeth. Every day another firm closes, another family breaks, another man stares into nothingness. The silence of Wall Street is only the beginning. Soon, the real weight will fall, not just on bankers and brokers, but on ordinary people, on grocers and teachers, on neighbours and strangers, on anyone who thought the crash was someone else's problem. Because the depression doesn't care where you sit, it only cares how hard you'll fall. And as the offices of Wall Street grow emptier, the breadlines of New York begin to grow longer. The panic of traders will soon become the hunger of families, and no banker's pool will be enough to buy back dignity once it's gone. The crash steals money first, but soon it begins to steal dignity. You see it on the streets every morning now. Men in good suits standing in long lines that stretch around corners, the signs read free soup, free bread. The price of admission is humiliation, and business is booming. You walk past one of these lines on your way to work. The faces are a mix of everything: clerks, mechanics, teachers, veterans. Some try to joke quietly, others just stare at the sidewalk. A man in a bowler hat looks down at his shoes as if trying to remember when he last polished them. Pride doesn't last long in the cold. Inside the soup kitchens, the air smells of cabbage and desperation. Volunteers ladle out bowls with assembly line precision, their smiles stretch thin. The men shuffle forward, hats in hand, each movement rehearsed like bad theatre. Nobody lingers over the food. It isn't a meal, it's survival. On Wall Street, the emptiness deepens. Firms close their doors for good, brass nameplates stripped from buildings overnight. Your own office is quieter than ever. The phones ring less, not more. Nobody calls when there's nothing left to say. The silence is worse than the chaos. Some nights you wander through the city just to see it with your own eyes. Theatres that once blazed with light now sit dark. Restaurants echo with empty tables. Men stand on corners holding cardboard signs that read, "Will work for food." A violinist plays on the sidewalk, his case open for coins. A week ago he was playing in a Broadway pit. The breadlines stretch longer with each passing day. Some men bring children, their faces pale under wool caps too thin for the cold. The kids wait silently, too tired to fidget, too young to understand why dinner now depends on standing in the street. Mothers clutching infants stand beside bankers who once barked orders at the exchange. In the line, everyone is equal, equally hungry. You hear jokes here and there, black humour born of misery. A man mutters that at least the soup is interest-free. Another quips that Hoover's promise of prosperity must have been meant for someone else. The laughter is short, brittle, swallowed quickly by silence. When survival is the punchline, jokes don't last long. Your boss, once a man of cigars and confidence, now skips lunch entirely. He claims he isn't hungry, but you know better. One afternoon you catch him eyeing the soup line from Sosindo, his jaw tight. He doesn't say anything, and neither do you. Some truths don't need words. At home, the change is just as sharp. The neighbours who once bragged about stocks now whisper about pawn shops. Wedding rings, pocket watches, even radios disappear one by one, traded for enough cash to buy groceries. Hallways that once rang with chatter now echo with silence. Nobody wants to admit they're starving. In the newspapers, the stories grow bleaker. Farmers losing land to foreclosure, factories shutting down entire shifts, families evicted from apartments with no place to go. The photographs are haunting. Faces gaunt, eyes hollow, children barefoot on city streets. You fold the paper quickly as if that could erase it. One evening you stand in a breadline yourself, not because you're starving yet, but because you want to understand. The cold seeps into your bones as you shuffle forward, step by step. When the ladle dips into your bowl, the volunteer doesn't look at you, doesn't speak. It's just another transaction stripped of pride, stripped of pretense. The soup is thin, salty, and unforgettable. The city changes shape around these lines. Street corners become gathering spots. Abandoned lots become kitchens. Charities do what they can, churches open their doors, neighbours share scraps. But the need is too great. For every bowl of soup, there are 10 more empty stomachs waiting. And still, some cling to illusions. Editorials insist recovery is around the corner. Bankers mutter that the market will stabilise any day now. Politicians urge patience, as if hunger could be put on hold. The optimism feels insulting, like offering a pep talk to a drowning man. Yet even in this misery you see flickers of humanity. A baker handing out loaves at midnight, a seamstress repairing coats for free, children sharing crust of bread without complaint. The kindness doesn't erase the despair, but it makes it bearable. Barely. The breadlines become the city's new rhythm. Every morning they form, every evening they dissolve. They stretch longer, then longer still, and with each passing week the lines are joined by more familiar faces, neighbours, friends, colleagues. No one is safe from hunger's call. As winter approaches, the lines stiffen in the cold winds, scarves pulled tight, hands shoved deep in pockets, feet shuffling to stay warm. Breath clouds the air like smoke, but the fire in people's bellies is gone. The city once roared with ambition, now it groans with hunger. And hunger has a way of rewriting dreams. Men who once bragged of million-dollar fortunes now dream only of a hot meal. Women who once hoped for Parisian dresses now hope their children won't go to bed hungry. Dreams shrink, bend, collapse under the weight of empty stomachs. The Great Depression isn't just numbers, it's the narrowing of hope itself. Soon these breadlines will evolve into something harsher. Shanty towns will rise, promises will break, faith in government will erode. Because hunger is only the beginning. The real despair is still to come. They call them Hoovervilles, not kindly, not respectfully, mockingly. Shanty towns of scrap wood, tinners and tar paper rise on the edges of cities, and people give them the president's name like a cruel joke. Herbert Hoover wanted prosperity. He got neighborhoods made of garbage. The first time you walk past one, it stuns you. An empty lot transformed into a patchwork village. Shacks cobbled together from shipping crates, cardboard, old advertising signs. Smoke curls from makeshift chimneys, the smell of wood and desperation hanging in the air. Children chase each other barefoot through mud that smells faintly of sewage. A man in a suit, what's left of it anyway, sits outside a shack with a tin cup. He once carried a briefcase, barked orders, and smoked cigars on the exchange. Now he stares at the horizon like it betrayed him. The only thing sharper than his hunger is his shame. Hoover insists things are fine. He gives speeches about temporary setbacks and fundamental soundness. He urges confidence, patience, and faith in the system. Listening to him feels like being told the house isn't burning while flames lick your shoes. People start calling newspapers they use to patch holes in walls Hoover blankets. Empty pockets turned inside out. Those are Hoover flags. Sarcasm becomes the only currency still in circulation. In your own neighbourhood, the changes are everywhere. Families vanish overnight, evicted without ceremony. Furniture piled on sidewalks like broken dreams. Men wander the streets with hollow eyes, looking for work that doesn't exist. Women pawn heirlooms for pennies just to buy bread. Even those still working live with constant fear, one pink slip away from the same fate. Your office clings on, barely. The phone calls are fewer now, mostly angry. Former clients demand to know how their fortunes vanished. Your boss has no answers. He mutters something about market forces and unprecedented events, but the words taste hollow. You write them down anyway because it's your job. On Sundays you take long walks uptown. Central Park itself has sprouted a Hooverville. Once the pride of the city, now dotted with shacks that look like they could collapse if you sneeze too hard. Men who once strolled there in fine coats now squat beside fires, heating thin soup in tin cans. The pigeons seem confused. Who fell further, them or the people? In one camp, a sign hangs crookedly on a shack. Welcome to prosperity. The letters are painted in black tar, dripping like sarcasm itself. You stand there staring at it, unable to decide whether to laugh or cry, probably both. The newspapers still quote Hoover's speeches. Recovery is just around the corner, he insists. It becomes a national punchline. Men in breadlines repeat it with bitter smirks. One mutters, "If it's around the corner, it must be the corner of hell." The others laugh, but the sound is sharp, not joyful. Even Congress begins to doubt. Senators grumble about inaction, about denial. But real help is slow, tangled in politics and pride. Bills stall, relief lags, promises pile higher than bread. For ordinary people, Washington might as well be another planet. At night, You hear the city differently now, not the clatter of streetcars or the hum of radios, but the coughing of the sick in cold shacks, the scrape of tin cups against empty pots, the restless shuffle of men wandering, searching for anything that resembles work, this soundtrack of despair. And yet there is resilience. Inside Hoovervilles, people form strange little communities. Someone builds a crude church out of packing crates. Another sets up a soup line with whatever scraps they can gather. Children still play, their laughter cutting briefly through the gloom. Life clings on, stubborn and uninvited. You sit by a campfire one evening, invited by a former client who now lives in a shack. He offers you a piece of stale bread, insisting you share it. You hesitate, then take it. The gesture is worth more than the food itself. For a moment, the firelight almost feels warm. Still, you can't ignore the anger building. People spit Hoover's name with venom now. It isn't just hunger, it's betrayal. They believed the promises, trusted the system, handed over their futures. Now those futures are built from scrap wood and desperation. The bitterness grows louder every day. As winter settles in, the Hoovervilles grow. More shacks, more smoke, more lives uprooted. The skyline of New York still gleams with skyscrapers, but below them stretches a city of tin and misery. It's a contrast so sharp it could cut glass. You stand at the edge of one such camp one night, the Empire State Building skeleton rising in the distance, steel beams climbing toward the sky while cardboard huts sag into the mud. The future and the failure side by side. It's hard to know which one speaks louder, but the truth is, hunger and poverty don't stay politely contained in shanty towns. They spread, they seep into farms, into factories, into homes, and soon the land itself will betray its people. The wind will rise, the soil will turn to dust, and the suffering will deepen. Because bread lines and Hoovervilles are only the beginning. The Dust Bowl waits on the horizon, ready to turn despair into desperation. And when it arrives, hunger will meet hopelessness in a storm of dirt and ruin. The city suffers, but the countryside bleeds. If Wall Street was the heart of the crisis, the farmland is the lungs, and they're choking. Drought rolls across the Midwest like an uninvited guest, and the soil itself begins to betray the people who worked it. At first it's just whispers, a bad harvest here, a dry season there. Farmers mutter about the weather as if it's a temporary inconvenience, like a squeaky hinge. But the whispers grow louder, and soon the word everyone dreads makes the papers. Dust. The ground dries to powder, lifted by winds that never seem to stop. Clouds of dirt sweep across Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, blotting out the sun. Farmhouses vanish in brown storms, crops shrivel to nothing. Livestock collapse in fields that once fed millions. It looks less like farmland and more like a battlefield after the bombs. Families fight losing battles against the elements. Wet sheets are hung over windows to block the dust, but it seeps through cracks anyway. Mothers wipe grit from their babies' mouths. Fathers shovel dust from their porches like snow. Every morning begins with sweeping, every night ends with coughing. The dust is relentless. Banks seize foreclosed farms like vultures picking at bones. Men who once prided themselves on independence find themselves begging for mercy from loan officers. The answer is always the same: no. Foreclosure notices appear like weeds, multiplying faster than crops ever did. Soon the migration begins. Families pile belongings into jalopies. broken down cars stacked high with mattresses, pots and children clinging to the sides. They head west toward California, chasing the rumor of work. It's a pilgrimage of desperation, the road lined with dust and dashed hopes. The migrants earn a new name, Okies. It doesn't matter if they're from Oklahoma or not. The word sticks, sharp and cruel. They arrive in California only to find fields already crowded with men just like them. The promised work is scarce, the wages lower than starvation rations. Shanty towns rise on the edges of orchards, rows of tents and lean-tos cobbled together from whatever can be found. Children pick fruit for pennies, women wash laundry in ditches, men line up for jobs that last a day, if that. The air is thick with dust and resentment. California promised paradise. It delivered another Hooverville with better weather. Back east you read about it in the papers. The photographs are haunting, faces lined with dirt, eyes hollow with exhaustion, children barefoot in fields of nothing, families huddled beside wagons under skies choked with dust. The headlines call it a tragedy. The photographs call it something worse, reality. One day, a farmer visits your office, not to invest, those days are gone, but to beg for mercy on a loan. Your boss shakes his head before the man even finishes speaking. There's nothing left, he mutters. The farmer nods slowly as if he expected no less. When he leaves, he tips his hat politely. It's the politeness that breaks your heart. In the diner, the conversations shift. No one brags about stocks anymore. Now they whisper about cousins on farms, brothers heading west, sisters sending letters filled with dust. One man mutters, "The whole country's falling apart." No one argues with him. The government responds with advice so absurd it borders on comedy. Hoover urges farmers to stick it out, plant more crops, have faith. Faith doesn't stop the wind. Faith doesn't water the corn. Faith doesn't keep children from coughing up mud. You begin to realize the depression isn't a storm that will pass. It's a climate, reshaping everything. The city starves, the farms choke, and the nation coughs on its own dust. It isn't temporary, it's the new normal. And yet somehow people endure. A mother sewing dresses from flour sacks, a boy building toys out of scrap tin, a farmer planting again even knowing the odds. Desperation breeds creativity, though it doesn't always breed hope. You sit by the radio one night, listening to reports of dust storms rolling across the plains. The announcer's voice is calm, almost casual, but the words land heavy. Families buried alive in their own homes, cattle suffocating in pastures, towns swallowed whole. It sounds like the end of the world. But the world doesn't end. It limps forward, coughing and stumbling, dragging itself toward another day. And soon, the despair in the countryside will collide with the anger in the cities. It will march on Washington itself, demanding justice, demanding relief, demanding anything. Because dust and desperation are not the final act. The bonus army is waiting in the wings, ready to bring the nation's pain to the president's doorstep. By 1932, hunger has learned how to march, and it marches on Washington. They call themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Force, though history will remember them as the Bonus Army. World War I veterans, worn thin by years of broken promises, gather by the thousands. Not with rifles this time, but with banners, bedrolls and desperation. The government promised them a bonus for their service, money to be paid in 1945. But 1945 might as well be another planet when your children are hungry in 1932. So they march, demanding early payment. Not charity, not handouts, just what was promised. It's patriotism with empty stomachs attached. They come from everywhere. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kansas, even the dust-choked plains. They ride boxcars, hitch wagons, walk until their shoes collapse. By summer, Washington fills with tents and shacks, another Hooverville on the Capitol's doorstep. Only this time the residents wear service medals pinned to threadbare coats. You travel there once curious. The sight is staggering. Pennsylvania Avenue lined with veterans' children splashing in makeshift fountains, banners reading, "We want our bonus." Some play harmonicas, others drill in mock formation. It looks like an army, only this one's armed with hope and frustration instead of rifles. Hoover, of course, panics. He insists the camps are dangerous, infiltrated by radicals and communists, which is odd, considering most of the men still salute the flag every morning. But to a president drowning in denial, hungry veterans look more like a threat than a warning. Congress debates, but the bill for early payment fails. The bonus army stays anyway. They have nowhere else to go. Whole families live under canvas in the shadow of the Capitol dome, as though irony itself pitched the tents. The city grows uneasy. Hoover grows angry. Then comes July. The order is given, clear them out. And who gets the job? General Douglas MacArthur, with none other than Dwight D. Eisenhower and George Patton riding at his side. It's like a grim dress rehearsal for another war, only the battlefield is Pennsylvania Avenue and the enemy is veterans of the last one. The cavalry charges. Tanks roll down the streets of the nation's capital. Soldiers in gas masks lob tear gas into crowds that once carried Old Glory across Europe. Families scatter, coughing, choking, clutching their children. Shacks are torched, belongings destroyed. It looks less like law and order and more like betrayal made visible. You read the papers the next morning in disbelief. US troops rout veterans, bonus army driven out. The photographs are damning. Smoke curling from tents, men doubled over from gas, children weeping in their mothers' arms. Whatever shred of faith remained in Hoover's leadership burns with those shacks. On Wall Street, what's left of your office falls into silence. Even the brokers can't defend it. One mutters, "If this is stability, God help us." Another shakes his head and says nothing at all. For once the sarcasm is gone, only shame remains. Hoover doubles down, of course. He calls the marchers agitators, insists order was restored, promises the nation is recovering. Nobody buys it anymore. Not the clerks, not the farmers, not the veterans coughing out tear gas on the road home. Recovery isn't around the corner, it's hiding in another decade. The election comes in November, and Hoover loses in a landslide. Not just defeated, obliterated. Franklin Delano Roosevelt sweeps in on a tidal wave of desperation and hope. "Happy days are here again," the campaign song declares. After Hoover, people are ready to believe anything, even happiness. But before Roosevelt can deliver on that promise, the nation must endure a long, cold winter. The Hoovervilles still stand, the breadlines still stretch, the dust still blows. Washington may change faces, but hunger doesn't care about elections. For millions, survival remains the only policy that matters. And yet the tide is turning. Because in March of 1933, Roosevelt will take the oath with a voice both calm and commanding. and his words will ignite something the Depression nearly killed. Belief. Belief that government can help. Belief that change is possible. Belief that maybe, just maybe, the darkness can lift. The bonus army marched and was broken, but their footsteps echo. They showed the cracks in the old order, the urgency of new answers, and soon those answers will arrive. Not perfectly, not instantly, but with the force of a new deal. Because the fire that burned their shacks did more than destroy. It lit a torch for change, and Roosevelt is waiting to carry it. March 4th, 1933. Washington hums with nervous anticipation. The country has been limping through 3 winters of despair, and now, at last, a new president steps forward. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, tall and calm, speaks the words that will become immortal. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. The crowd erupts, a cheer bursting through years of silence and dread. It isn't just a speech, it's a lifeline. For the first time in years, the nation feels like someone is speaking directly to its wounds. In your office, what's left of it, you listen on the radio with your colleagues. Even your boss, worn thin by years of ruin, sits straighter at the sound of Roosevelt's voice. It feels less like politics and more like a sermon delivered to the entire country at once. For a moment you forget the bread lines, the Hoovervilles, the dust. For a moment you believe. And then, action. Roosevelt's first 100 days are a blur of signatures, laws and promises. Banks shut down temporarily in a bank holiday to stop the bleeding. The Emergency Banking Act follows, and when the banks reopen, people actually deposit money instead of withdrawing it. It feels like a magic trick, confidence restored by sheer force of will. The alphabet agencies march into existence like an army of acronyms. CCC, WPA, NRA, TVA, each one promising jobs, order or hope. Young men plant trees in national forests, build trails and send money home. Dams rise from riverbeds, electrifying rural towns that once lit homes with kerosene. For the first time in years, the hum of construction replaces the silence of despair. You see the change on the streets. Soup lines are still long, but the faces in them look different. Less hopeless, more determined. Posters go up promising work projects. Neighbours whisper about opportunities instead of evictions. It isn't prosperity, not yet, but it's movement. And after years of stagnation, movement feels like salvation. Not everyone is impressed. Bankers grumble about regulation. Industrialists mutter about government meddling. Some newspapers warn Roosevelt is leading the country towards socialism, but ordinary people don't care. When you're hungry, ideology tastes worse than stale bread. One morning you walk past a WPA project on your way to work. Men with shovels dig into the frozen earth, building a new road. Their faces are lined with exhaustion, but their eyes shine. They aren't begging, they aren't waiting, they're working, and in that there's dignity. Your boss, who once scoffed at Roosevelt, begins to change too. He still mutters about deficits and reckless spending, but you catch him one afternoon quietly smiling at the radio. It's a small smile, but after years of none at all, it looks miraculous. The papers sing a different tune now. New Deal program launched. Jobs returning, banks steady. The optimism feels almost foreign after years of despair. Some call Roosevelt a magician, others a saviour, others a reckless gambler. But no one can deny he's doing something, and something feels a lot better than nothing. In the diner, the conversations shift again. Not about lost fortunes, not about Hoover's failures, but about projects and jobs. One man brags that his nephew joined the CCC and is sending money home. A woman mentions her brother working on a dam in Tennessee. The cook, once silent, now jokes that maybe he'll be hired to feed the whole work crew. The laughter is still thin, but it's real this time. You still walk past Hoovervilles, but even they feel changed. Some residents whisper that help is coming, that relief checks are on the way, that jobs might be offered. The shacks still sag, the smoke still rises, but the despair is lighter. Hope, like weeds, finds cracks even in the pavement of misery. Roosevelt himself becomes a symbol. You hear his voice in fireside chats, calm and steady, as if he's sitting in your living room. He explains policies in plain language, turning acronyms into lifelines. Listening to him, you almost forget the banks that failed, the dust that smothered farms, the veterans gassed in Washington. Almost. Because the Depression isn't over. The breadlines are still long, the Hoovervilles still sprawling, the farmers still choking on dust. The market is still broken, unemployment still staggering, but the feeling has shifted from hopelessness to possibility, from paralysis to motion, from silence to cautious applause. You realize one night sitting by the radio that the New Deal is less about money and more about morale. It's a national pep talk backed by jobs and cement, and for a country on its knees, even standing halfway up feels like triumph. But shadows remain. The Depression still lingers like a stubborn illness. Not every promise will be kept. Not every program will succeed. And as the years drag on, the question becomes clear. Can Roosevelt's magic last, or is it only a reprieve before the storm returns? Because recovery is stirring, but so are doubts. And soon the optimism of the New Deal will be tested by the stubborn weight of reality. By the mid-1930s, the country has learned to live in the in-between. Not prosperity, not collapse. Something murkier. A twilight zone where recovery glimmers on the horizon, but hardship still walks the streets. Call it hope with a limp. The New Deal builds bridges, dams and roads, and people cheer the noise of construction. But the breadlines don't vanish. Unemployment remains staggering. Millions of men still searching for work. Millions of families still one rent payment away from the street. It's progress, yes, but progress you can't always taste. On Wall Street, your office limps along. The desks are fewer, the ledgers thinner, the phone lines quieter. There are no frantic booms anymore, no roaring manias. The ticker tapes trickle instead of roar. You write down numbers with the steady boredom of someone who has stopped expecting miracles. The diner conversations reflect the same mood. Not wild optimism, not despair, just weary practicality. Men mutter about relief checks, women talk about WPA jobs. The cook jokes that government acronyms are the only thing multiplying these days. The laughter is tired, but it's laughter all the same. Factories hum again, but not at full speed. Strikes flare as workers demand better pay, better hours, basic dignity. Pickets appear outside factory gates, signs painted in hurried strokes. We want work that pays. Police wagons idle nearby, ready to restore order. The clash feels like a grim reminder. Recovery isn't the same as justice. In the papers, Roosevelt is both hero and villain. Some call him the savior of the nation. Others call him a traitor to his class. Cartoonists draw him juggling acronyms like circus balls. Editorials praise him one day and condemn him the next. But one thing is undeniable: he has made government impossible to ignore. At night, you still hear radios buzzing through apartment windows. Families lean in, listening to Roosevelt's fireside chats as though their lives depend on it. Sometimes you stop in the hallway to listen too. His voice carries a strange magic, as if confidence itself were contagious. For a few minutes you almost forget the shadows. But then you walk past a Hooverville still clinging to life on the edge of town. The shacks sag, the fires sputter, the children play in mud. Not everyone has been touched by the alphabet agencies. Not everyone has found work. Recovery, it turns out, doesn't travel evenly. Farmers still suffer. The Dust Bowl continues to choke the plains, sending more families west. California is crowded with Okies, their jalopies lined up like caravans of despair. Fruit orchards hum with pickers paid in pennies, the cycle of exploitation unbroken. For every dam built in Tennessee, there's a family coughing in Kansas. In your own life, the changes are subtle. You still have work, though less of it. Your boss speaks less often, but when he does, it's no longer despair, it's calculation. He thinks maybe the market is stabilizing. He even jokes once, half-heartedly, that you might live to see prosperity again. You laugh because it's easier than crying. Politics, meanwhile, grows louder. Huey Long shouts about share our wealth. Father Coughlin rants into microphones, his voice dripping venom disguised as populism. Every radio seems to carry a new prophet promising salvation. The country listens, hungry for answers, wary of betrayal. On Wall Street, the exchange is quieter, almost somber. Traders move like ghosts, their voices subdued. Gone is the frenzy of 1929. In its place is a cautious shuffle. You think sometimes the silence is louder than the roar ever was. It's not excitement that drives the floor now, it's survival. You walk home one evening through a city that feels both alive and broken. Children skip rope in alleys while their parents whisper about unpaid bills. Streetcars rattle past soup lines. The skyscrapers still gleam, but beneath them lies a city stitched together with hope and hunger. It's a patchwork quilt fraying at the edges. The depression, you realize, is no longer a crash, it's a condition. A fever that rises and falls, sometimes easing, sometimes burning hotter. The patient isn't dead, but he isn't healthy either. He's just waiting, sweating, hoping the fever breaks. And while Roosevelt works his magic at home, shadows gather abroad. Whispers of fascism in Europe, of new wars brewing, of storms not measured in dust but in armies. The papers bury these stories on page 6 for now, but you can feel it. The world is shifting again. The depression has not ended. It has simply changed shape, waiting for its next chapter. And soon, the clouds of recovery will darken with the clouds of war. By the late 1930s, America is caught in a strange limbo. The New Deal has patched holes, but the ship still leaks. Unemployment lingers stubbornly high, wages remain thin, and the depression refuses to release its grip entirely. The patient is breathing, yes, but still coughing up dust. On Wall Street, the exchange hums faintly, a shadow of its old self. The roaring chaos of 1929 feels like a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Traders shuffle papers with none of the manic confidence of a decade earlier. The ticker tape rattles along subdued, as though even the machine has learned caution. The city itself wears its scars openly. Hoovervilles haven't disappeared, they've simply grown quieter. Families still live in patched-up shacks, still line up at soup kitchens, still barter dignity for survival. The skyscrapers gleam overhead like smug reminders of prosperity that never trickled down. It's a city living two lives at once, glittering above, gasping below. And then, across the ocean, new headlines steal attention. Germany rearming, Italy invading Ethiopia, Spain tearing itself apart in civil war. Europe, it seems, hasn't learned anything from the last catastrophe. The word fascism creeps into conversations sharp and unsettling. At the diner, men stir their coffee and argue whether America should care. Not our fight, one insists. Let Europe burn itself out. Another shakes his head. You said that in 1914. How'd that work out? The cook grunts and mutters that he's too busy surviving the Depression to worry about Mussolini. Roosevelt walks a tightrope. He promises neutrality, insists America will stay out of foreign wars. But he also whispers about preparedness, about the need to watch the horizon. It's the political equivalent of saying, "I'm not hungry," while secretly ordering a sandwich just in case. You feel the tension in your office. Brokers glance at foreign news almost as often as the stock pages. Investors talk nervously about arms manufacturers, about oil, about steel. It's as though the market itself senses the storm brewing abroad. If prosperity won't come from peace, perhaps it will come from war. On the streets, the contradictions deepen. Movie theatres pack audiences with glamorous musicals while outside men still dig through trash for food. Radios crackle with swing music, drowning out the sound of eviction notices being nailed to doors. America laughs and dances, but always with one eye on the breadline. The Farm Belt hasn't recovered either. Dust still blows across the plains, though not as fiercely as before. The scars remain. Abandoned farms, weather-beaten barns, families long gone west. California is still swollen with migrants, still grinding them down in orchards and fields. The Okie camps are less shocking now, only because misery has become familiar. In politics, storms brew as well. Father Coughlin rants louder on the radio, his sermons dipped in venom. Huey Long is gone, assassinated, but his ghost lingers in calls for wealth redistribution. People are restless, impatient with half measures. The New Deal gave hope, but not enough bread. Hope, it turns out, isn't edible. You walk home one night through a city buzzing with contradictions. A jazz club spills light and laughter onto the sidewalk, while a man sleeps in a doorway not 20 feet away. Two boys toss a baseball in the street with carefree shouts, while their mother watches with worry etched deep in her face. America is surviving, yes, but unevenly, uncomfortably. And then comes September 1939. Germany invades Poland. Britain and France declare war. Suddenly the clouds that hovered on the horizon burst open. The world is at war again. In America, the reaction is mixed. Some say, not again. Others whisper that war might be the only thing strong enough to finally kill the Depression. Factories stir, contracts are signed, whispers of rearmament grow louder. The economy twitches like a patient given a jolt of electricity. You watch your boss one morning as he studies the paper. He shakes his head at the headlines, but his eyes gleam faintly. War, after all, means steel, oil, ships, guns. And steel, oil, ships and guns mean money. It's a grim arithmetic, but arithmetic all the same. By 1940, America is still officially neutral, but the gears are grinding. Factories hum louder. Workers are hired back. The hum of production drowns out the silence of despair. Jobs return, slowly at first, then faster. People notice. The breadlines shrink, the Hoovervilles thin. It isn't recovery, it's mobilization wearing a disguise. And in your own life, you feel it too. The office grows busier, the phones ring more often. Clients talk not of radios or cars, but of contracts, shipments, war orders. The market feels alive again, though the pulse is strange, beating to the rhythm of drums half a world away. The irony isn't lost on you. The New Deal tried to heal the Depression with jobs and hope. War heals it with bombs and orders for bullets. Apparently, what prosperity really needed was a global catastrophe. By late 1941, the shadow is no longer distant. Pearl Harbor burns and neutrality dies overnight. America plunges into the war, and with it the Depression finally loosens its grip. Factories roar, workers flood assembly lines, the unemployment lines vanish into uniforms and paychecks. The cure for the Great Depression, it turns out, comes dressed as global disaster. You stand on a New York street one night, listening to the sound of factories pounding through the dark. The city glows again, alive, urgent, humming with purpose. It feels like the 1920s roar has returned, but this time the orchestra is military. The future is uncertain, but it no longer feels empty. And as the war clouds settle firmly over the nation, you realize the Depression is ending, not because of prosperity's triumph, but because survival demanded it. The stock tickers hum again, the streets bustle again, but it's all built on the smoke of war. The patient has risen from his sickbed, but only to march into battle. Soon the Depression will be remembered not as a single event, but as a shadow stretching across a decade. And the only thing left will be to look back and wonder how the country ever endured. The Great Depression does not end with a bell ringing on Wall Street. It does not end with Hoover's speeches, or even Roosevelt's alphabet soup of programs. It ends with factories roaring to life for war, with men marching to battlefields, with women welding ships at midnight. It ends because the world demanded it, not because the nation healed itself neatly. Looking back, you realize the Depression wasn't just an economic disaster. It was a personality test for a nation. It stripped away illusions, exposed weaknesses, and forced people to improvise dignity out of scraps. Breadlines and Hoovervilles were the exam questions. The answers were community, stubbornness, and bitter humour. Wall Street, where you began this story, feels almost like another country now. The ticker still clatters, but the men leaning over it are changed. No more champagne bets on radio stocks. No more clerks boasting of easy fortunes. There is caution now, baked into every trade. It's as if the market itself learned shame. You remember the chaos of 1929, the shouting, the ticker drowning, the crowd swelling outside the exchange. And you remember the silence after, the empty desks, the bosses broken. That silence has never quite left. Even as the city hums again, you can hear it if you listen closely. A ghost of ruin humming under the prosperity. The faces linger too, the farmer tipping his hat politely before foreclosure, the broker muttering numbers in the lamplight after losing everything, the children waiting in bread lines, too young to know they were teaching the world about resilience. These are the real stock tickers of the Depression, not numbers but memories. And then there was the humour, sharp as broken glass, calling cardboard shelters Hoovervilles, newspapers Hoover blankets, empty pockets Hoover flags. Sarcasm became survival, proof that even in hunger, Americans refused to surrender wit. Laughter may not fill a stomach, but it keeps the spirit upright. Sometimes that's enough. The Depression also redrew the map of trust. Faith in unregulated markets crumbled. Faith in government, once dismissed, became a lifeline. FDR's voice on the radio felt more real than the numbers on Wall Street ever did. And though his programs didn't cure everything, they taught the country to believe again, at least for a while. You think of the bonus army, veterans gassed and driven from the capital, a stain on Hoover's legacy, a turning point in how the nation viewed itself. It showed how fragile dignity could be, how easily promises could be broken, and it showed that patience, when stretched thin, eventually snaps. You think of the Dust Bowl too? The storm that swallowed farms, the families turned into migrants, the Okies who chased work westward only to find more misery waiting. They carried the Depression in their lungs, in their wagons, in their eyes, and they became symbols of endurance, even as they bent under the weight of dust and despair. In hindsight, the decade feels like a riddle. A nation so rich in resources, so proud in spirit, brought to its knees by paper losses and poor decisions, and yet somehow it survived. Not because of brilliance, but because people kept waking up and moving forward anyway. Sometimes crawling, sometimes coughing, but always forward. Your own journey through it mirrors the country's. From the chaos of Wall Street's crash to the quiet of empty offices, from breadlines to Hoovervilles, from Roosevelt's calm voice to the thunder of factories before war. You watched the fall, lived the silence, and felt the slow, uneven rise. The Depression wasn't just history, it was life itself, heavy and unrelenting. And now, looking back, the lessons are clear. Prosperity is fragile, denial is dangerous, community matters more than fortune, and humour, yes, humour, is a weapon sharper than despair. Because if you can laugh at Hoover blankets while shivering under them, you've already beaten half the battle. When the war ends and prosperity finally returns, people will try to forget. They'll chase new dreams, buy new cars, fill new suburbs. But the Depression will linger in their bones, shaping how they save, how they spend, how they trust. It will become the shadow behind every bright day. And for you, it will always be more than headlines or history books. It will be the sound of the ticker choking, the sight of soup lines stretching into the fog, the bitter jokes told over watery coffee, and the quiet dignity of people who had nothing but still shared what little they did. The Great Depression was never just about markets. It was about people, and people, fragile, foolish, stubborn, resilient, are the only reason the story has an ending at all. Now, as you close the book on this chapter, you feel the weight lift slightly. The noise of the market, the silence of hunger, the speeches, the dust, the despair, it all drifts into memory. What remains is the simple truth. America bent, but it did not break. And as the city hums again as war reshapes the world, you take one last look at the shadow of the Depression in the rear view. Not with joy, not with sorrow, just with understanding. Because sometimes survival itself is the victory.